Grade 7s. So we have more or less finished our unit on fractions and the different operations with fractions. And we're going to move on to a mini unit based off of converting fractions to decimals and percents. And then from there, we're going to go into operations with decimals. But this is a quick unit that we should be able to do in probably 2 or 3 days at most. It's pretty simple when you break it down, and it's also a really cool tidbit for you guys whenever you get quizzes and tests and stuff like that going forward. You can actually figure out what kind of percentage mark you get on all your tests and use that to kind of figure out your averages. So with that, we're going to go into this. So the basic breakdown of converting a fraction to a decimal is if I give you a fraction 3 over 5, to convert it to a decimal, all I do is I take my top number and divide it by my bottom number. So I do 3 divided by 5. So if I punch that into a calculator, because usually you can't do that in your head, is 3 divided by 5 equals 0.1 or 0.6. If you have a proper fraction, as in the bottom number is smaller than the top number, you're always going to have a 0 as the whole number of the decimal, because it's like with a regular fraction, how sometimes you have mixed fractions with whole numbers here. There's technically an invisible 0 right there for fractions that are not mixed numbers. So when you take 3 divided by 5, you basically bring that 0 over, and it is your first digit, and then it's a decimal, and then it would be whatever the numerator divided by the denominator would be. So that's how you convert a fraction into a decimal. You take your top number and divide it by your bottom number. So I'm going to do a couple more examples. So if I give you the fraction 5 over 7, to convert it into a decimal, I take 5 divided by 7. So you always take your top number divided by your bottom number. 5 divided by 7 equals 0.71. So sometimes you're going to have decimals that have a long amount of numbers. Just remember to round it. Usually I just round it to 2 decimal spots. And there's usually no point in going more unless a question is asking you to go to more decimal places. But usually if you just leave it to 1 or 2, that's perfect. So that's how you convert it into a decimal. Take your top divided by your bottom. But what if you have an improper fraction? So if I gave you the fraction 13 over 12, you would do the same process. You would do your top number divided by your bottom number. So 13 divided by 12. Except this time, it's not going to have a 0 because 13 is bigger than 12. So 12 has to be able to fit into 13 at least once, because if I was going to put this into a mixed number, I could fit 12 into 13 once, plus have whatever is left over as my fraction. So the same rule applies for decimal. If I do 13 divided by 12, 12 is going to fit in at least once, and the decimal is going to be whatever is left over. So 13 divided by 12 gives me 1.08 rounded. And that's essentially how you convert it. Take your top number divided by your bottom number. And that's it. How about if I'm going to put decimals into percents? This is also really easy. So if I need to take a fraction and put it right into a percent, so let's do this on another page. If you got a question that says turn 6/7 into a percentage, what you do is you first have to convert it into a decimal. So I take 6 and divide it by 7, which gives me 6 divided by 7 gives me 0.86, and that's rounded. What I do with this 0.86 is you multiply it by 100. So 0.86 times 100 gives me 85.7. 5.7. Now, to make this a percent, I can either have a percent with a decimal, but if it is asking for a full number, which usually most of the time you will not have a percentage, you will not have a decimal in your percentage. Usually you'll just be rounding it to the nearest whole number. So 85.7, I would round up to 86, and then I put my percentage sign. And that's it. So that's how you turn a fraction into a percentage. So I'm going to do 2 more examples, and that's what your work is going to be based off of. It's going to be a chart where you basically convert fractions into decimals and decimals into percents. I'm going to try to find one / put some questions in there that are improper fractions. That's also a good tip, is if you ever have a question, you probably will not have this from me, but if you ever see it in the future, is if you got a mixed number that was like 1 whole and 1/3, and it asked you to convert that into a percentage, easiest way to do it is to take your fraction, put it into an improper number. So 1 times 3 plus 1 is 4 over 3. And then that's how you would make it into a decimal, so 4 divided by 3, and then take that decimal and turn it into a percent by the same process, by timesing it by 100. And that's it. So I'm just going to do another few examples with proper fractions. So let's do 4 over 9, and the other one is going to be let's say 8 over 11. So I'm going to do a couple more examples of this. I'm also going to do a couple examples of how to take a decimal or a percentage and convert those into a fraction or whatever is missing. So I'm going to do a mini chart with you, which is basically what your work is going to look a lot like. So 4 divided by 9 is my first step. So I take my numerator and divide it by my denominator. So 4 divided by 9 gives me 0.44 rounded, and I take 0.44 and times it by 100, which gives me 44%. Also, you'll notice as you practice this, whenever you're taking a decimal and timesing it by 100, all you're doing is taking this decimal and moving it over 2 spots. So I took the 0.86, I moved the decimal places 2 places over, so it looks like this now. And that's the same thing as 86%. So it's just a little tidbit. If you are ever unsure or you want to look at another way to get the answer, is you move the decimal place over 2 spots. But if you have a decimal that looks like this, you have to move it over, and then in this empty spot you put a 0. So it becomes 60. So this one, let's do 8 divided by 11. So numerator divided by denominator. 8 divided by 11. 8 divided by 11 equals 0.73. And that's rounded. And now I times this by 100, or move it over 2 decimal spots, which gives me 73%. So that's how I take my fractions and convert them into decimals and percents. Now we're going to look at, I'm going to quickly write out a quick chart. So if you have a chart that has, this will be fractions, instead of writing it out, it will look different on the chart that you get, but I'm just going to write it as this, just because it's hard to write with this thing. So if you have a chart like this and your object is to fill it in, so let's do 7 over 8 here. We'll do 0.6 here, and we'll do 72% over here. So the object is to move these or to convert these into one form or the other. So we already know how to do fractions into decimals and percents. So what I do is I take my fraction, numerator divided by denominator, so 7 divided by 8. It gives me 0.875. Rounded, it would be 0.88. And to convert it into a percentage, I times that by 100, which would give me 88%. So that one is pretty easy. To take a decimal, we already know how to take a decimal into a percent. So that's what we're going to do first, is take this decimal and times it by 100. So 0.6 times 100 gives me 60%. But I'm missing the fraction. So to take this and put it into a fraction, what I do is a percentage is just part of 100. 100 is the whole amount. So to take this and to put it to a fraction, I basically put my percentage number, in this case 60, and I put it over 100. However, I can't just leave it as this. I need to convert this into simplest terms. If I am given a number like this, I have to find something that they can both divide into. 60 and 100 can both divide equally into 10. So I'm going to do that first. So 60 divided by 10 gives me 6. 100 divided by 10 gives me 10. And I can still simplify it further because both of these are even numbers. So I can divide it by 2, which gives me 3 over 5. So I can't make it any smaller, so I know my fraction is going to be 3 over 5. All right, so that's if you're given just the decimal. Now, if you're given a percent and nothing else, well, remember how we took this percent here and put it over 100 and then turned that into a fraction? We're going to do the same thing with this percent. So I take 72 and I put it over 100. And I'm going to put it into simplest terms. I know I can divide both by 2 because they're both even numbers. So 72 divided by 2 is 36 over 50. I know I can make it, I can break it down further because they can both fit into, they're both even numbers, so I can fit them into 2. I'm just going to erase this over here. So we can both fit into 2. So 36 divided by 2 is 15 plus 3 is 18 over 25. I think that's the furthest it can go. Yep, that's the furthest it can go. So my fraction is 18 over 25. How do I convert this into a decimal? Take my numerator and divide it by my denominator. So 18 divided by 25 equals 0.72. And if I convert that into a percentage, it equals 72%, so I know I'm right. Another option was, if I just needed to find out what the decimal was, there's that invisible decimal spot right here. I could have just moved 2 spots to the left and put it here and put a 0 in front. It would also create the same thing. But that being said, you'd still have to put it into a fraction, of course. So that's how you convert fractions into decimals, decimals to percents, fractions to percents, and so on. So you're going to have a chart that looks a lot like this. It'll be due Friday by 10 p.m. I'm going to try to upload the video again onto the actual classroom page, But worst comes to worst, if it's not working again, because last time I was trying it, I tried 3 different times and each time it took over an hour and no progress was being made to try to upload the lesson. So this time I'm going to try it again. If it doesn't work, it'll probably be another YouTube video. It is what it is. So hopefully you guys are okay with the YouTube videos for now, if the online classroom isn't working or if it's just taking too long to load. But thank you guys. Thank you for all your hard work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the awesome questions you've been asking. And I'll see you guys on Friday.